Hey, my name is Augusta Charles Foster. It's the Mantalk Monday podcast, and I really love my son. This isn't a podcast episode for everyone. This is an episode for every parent of a child, specifically parents of sons. More, more specifically, Black fathers, Black mothers, Black sons. Now, as always, disclaimer: I have four daughters, and I'm never going to discount my daughters. However, in light of everything going on in the world right now, which always seems to be going on, I wanted to do an episode for the sons. And at some point one day, because the internet kind of lives forever, until Jesus come back and wrap all this up. The internet, they says, lives forever. In the year 2015, my life changed. As a man, as a worker, as a businessman, as a husband, as a father, as in everything. To know me, 2015, I'm married the first time. I've got two daughters. Like I always, my sister jokingly says, instant like pop family. My oldest daughter, who's now 16 and will be 17, I've been the father in her life since she was 4 or 5 months old. I had my first natural born daughter uh, in 2014. And a year later, my son was born. And the reason I say 2015 changed it all for me is because as a parent, father of girls, girl dad, team girl dad, super excited. My daughters are amazing, all of them, even the last two, like they're all great. But in 2015, it was different because I had a son. And for most people, they would roll with the tropes of, oh, I got a boy now, somebody to roughhouse with, somebody to throw the ball and play sports and all that. No, 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 no. None of the stereotypes. The year 2015, in fact, not even 2015, we found out the gender of our child, our now son, when I want to say shortly after my birthday. And unless you're living under a rock and you don't realize that was around, we found out we were having a son maybe February or March of 2015. And finding out we were having a boy was cool. Like I remember, they spin them, and you with the girls, of course, there's something you don't see with girls that you see with boys, uh, naturally. And in the moment, I was happy. But if you know, in August of 2014 was the murder of Mike Brown and the uprising in Ferguson. And we were like 3 years removed from Trayvon Martin. And I had my own run ins with law enforcement and had buried friends, almost exclusively males, Black, all like before the age of 16, like classmates, associates, teammates. And now in this moment, here I am. I'm supposed to be super excited. And that day I was excited. And I went home that night and they were talking about, after and other things going on in the world. And I probably cried for about 2 hours. And the reason I cried was I recognized I was bringing a son into a world that really wasn't open to accepting him. And this is what I mean by that. Tamir Rice was killed and he was 10 years old. And I remember watching the news conference and watching this hearing a news person ask a question and like watching like some or hearing a I remember hearing the description from like the chief of police going a teen or a young man and hearing off screen this like young white guy who was a news reporter go, he was a kid, he was a boy, he was a kid gunned down in Cleveland. And I think of the current news, Nolan Wells, and I titled this episode "Let Black Boys Grow" because of those stories and the feelings that I felt. Like that was the first time in my life where I had an actual like fear consumed me. I had guns pulled on me. I'd been shot at, stabbed at, jumped, car accidents, a handful of things that probably should have like put more fear into me. But that night, seeing watching the news, seeing everything going in the world, like the first 4 years of my son's life, there was so much going on. And it always seemed to be some young black male, so many under the age of 18. And I'm not just talking about the ones that make the news because some cop kills them, but I grew up in LA. I witnessed gang violence firsthand. And even though my son, like, I always applaud his mother and their grandparents because they grew up very sheltered. Like, my son is like their family. I salute to them. If y'all watch this, I appreciate y'all. I will never knock anybody who grew up in like cul-de-sacs and gated communities with pools. Be out of the way. That's the goal. It's the goal, man. And I just look even at my son's life now at 11 years old. He's intelligent and he's quick. And I'm excited to see him grow because far too often we don't get to see black boys grow. Part of the reason we don't get to see black boys grow is because we don't get to be boys for very long. I remember the first time being stopped by the police. Well, quick story. I wasn't stopped by the police. Uh, Statute of limitations. I remember an incident where I may or may not have been with some associates, and there may or may not have been some items, including some money, lifted from a store. I may or may not have ran from the police over some walls and ducked the county sheriff and LAPD and showed up home really, really late. Uh, Word would have it, my mother was so tapped in with the local PD that the description they gave, like one of the cops, like one of the lieutenants went to her and said, I think it was your kid, but I'm assuming it's not Augusta. And I remember her asking me and me just looking at her with this deadpan stare of like, hey, this and this happened, 5 or 6 boys. That seemed like you would nah. From that day on, like my run-ins with the cops just like increased. And I was like, ah. And in that moment, like I look back on it and I go, part of that was my mistake. Like in a rush to grow up, to be with the homies, to fit in. And that was backwards. Because it's part of the reason black boys don't get to grow up because I was putting myself in an adult position. And a lot of times there are young men who aren't like me. They're not trying to put themselves in adult positions. They just want to be a kid. They just want to be a boy. And so many of us don't get that opportunity. It could be attributed to, you could say, lack of fathers in the home, school to prison pipeline. It's all of those things. The root, the point is boyhood doesn't exist long enough. We're thrust into these roles where you have to be an adult. Uh, the invisible expectations, as I say, where it goes beyond taking out the trash and washing dishes. But so many people who I know who grew up in By the time they hit 16, 17, they're paying bills. They have these responsibilities. It'd be different if it was rooted in responsibility and growth, but no, it's it's an obstacle placed in front of them. It's an obligation that they're not supposed to have. So their youth is snatched. Gang life, sexual trauma, abandonment, boyhood, gone. Now, that's not to say that this doesn't happen to our girls, but I'm from an era where I could remember if you had an 11 or 12-year-old cousin or sister, whoever was a woman, all your grandmothers and great aunts who they lived lives themselves. Topic for another day. But the girls were deemed fast. So they would make sure you're covered up, you're doing this, don't do that. Not for the boys. Part of the reason I say that is recent news Nolan Wells. When the Nolan Wells case first broke, when it first happened, there was this odd mix of sympathy and blame. And I recognize that often whenever things happen to a young woman, and it's more than just the infantilization of young girls and women in general as if they lack competence, uh, some of the situations that we all end up in are our own decision making. But when an 18-year-old girl, something occurs, no one thinks like it's bad. I remember the sister who went to the party, and everyone's going to know what party I'm talking about. The first couple of days were, man, that's horrible. It's bad. The conversation shifted. And again, you know that picture. With Nolan Wells, less than 24 hours in, there wasn't as much sympathy. There was questioning of the parents. Why was this boy there? Why would you let him around all these white folk? It's unsafe. It's that. And that was the conversation. The sympathy wasn't as great, partially, quite honestly, because it was a boy. I'll say that again. And I say this confidently because I want you to go back and look at social media. The first 24 to 48 hours of the news surrounding Nolan Wells' death was alarming to people who haven't seen this play out before. But there was so much of that first 48 hours of blame placed on his parents. There was so much unearthing of his social media, of him associating with young white girls, to where there quite literally was victim blaming. And it's almost exclusively because it was a boy, because he was a young man. Because why is this black boy with these white girls going to prom? He couldn't find a black girl. He couldn't find a black date. His parents, closeness to whiteness, and all of this. And people had forgotten in the moment that parents lost their son, that a black boy did not get the opportunity to grow. And we see this, and it's hurtful. I say it partially as a black boy who didn't get the opportunity to maximize his youth, mostly because I chose to do stupid things that pushed me into an adult position way before I needed to, but partially because society saw me as a threat. And that's why I talk about my son. You see, right now, he's this like big head, super smart, articulate 11-year-old. But I know in reality, one day he's going to hit a growth spurt. He's going to have a mustache. He's going to have hair on his body. When does he stop being cute? When does he stop being the adorable boy? Not to me, because he'll always be my son, but to others. You see, this is what I mean by letting black boys grow. Where's the fine line of this handsome, young, smart kid? Where was the fine line with Trayvon Martin, the kid who was at space camp? Where was the fine line with Tamir Rice, a little boy who was playing like AYSO soccer, running around in his backyard? Where was the fine line with Mike Brown? Where was the fine line with any of these young black boys whose lives were snatched and they didn't get the opportunity to grow? When did they go from being a cute boy to being some man? The issue we have is society rips youth from black men. They do it with the school to prison pipeline. They do it with literacy. They do it with systems in place. But then we also do it to ourselves. I've argued I've argued far too much with women who I know who are single mothers who I love about telling your son he's the man of the house, because your 12-year-old son is not the man of the house. God rest his soul. R.I.P. my boy Pat. Pat worked for the uh, juvenile department in L.A. And I remember him telling me a story way back in the day where he said, and I've told this story before. He said, it's crazy. You see, the process is this: a mother and father split, whatever the situation, whether dad wants to be there, he doesn't want to be there, mom doesn't want to be there, whatever it is, it's the son. And somewhere in there, mom goes, I need a man in the house, and I'm going to make it the son. So now this boy is 7 years old, from 7 to 13. He's been told he's the man of the house. He's responsible. He's got it. You've spoken it over him. Now when he gets 12, 13, with hair on his chest, a little bit of tone in his voice, he's only been the man of the house. So he pushes back against any other man that you bring around. He pushes back against you because he's confused, thinking he's in a husband role. And past breaking this down for him, I'm thinking of all the homeboys and friends who I had grown up. And I realized where he says, you get all these dudes who've been told they've been man in the house for 6, 7 years. And now mom can't control them. School can't control them. And in the words of Roosevelt Jones Jr., now the man gets a hold of you. And Pat was the man. Pat, Dre, Cash, all of them worked for LA Juvenile. And they would all say the same thing. This kid who's been the man of the house since he was 7, now he's 12 and 13, and he's in the juvenile detention center. He's in YA. He is in LP at Los Padrinos. And now he's in there with dudes who are also the man of the house, because that's mostly who was in there. And they're robbed of their youth. Because their mama said, I need you to be the man of the house. Because their dad said, I need you to man up. And it's man, 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 man. And they don't allow for the black boy to grow naturally. I've been talking to you for almost 20 minutes. I've talked about prison. I've talked about juvie. I've talked about parents, motherhood, all of that. But really, what I want you to understand is, if you have a black son or a black boy in your life, period, that you love and you respect and you want to see grow and succeed, let that happen. Society has already thrown enough weight and stress on these young men. We have a young man now whose death is unsolved, and the immediate response wasn't "that's sad." It was, he with white girls. His parents let him around white people. Black boys deserve the opportunity to grow. They deserve the opportunity to be boys. They should be able to play and be rambunctious and jump around and it not be deemed aggressive. Black boys should be able to walk into rooms and spaces and be their full, authentic selves. They shouldn't have to make themselves small so that other people are comfortable. They shouldn't have to be uncomfortable so people are comfortable. Their discomfort shouldn't bring you peace. That's what it should be, but that's not the world that we live in. In closing, I want to see my son. I pray and I believe that I will have the opportunity and the chance to see my son grow old. Because I'm going to be a fly looking 100-something-year-old, but believe I'll have the opportunity to see my son grow, because I'm present, because I speak to him, because I pour into him, not because I tell him that he's handsome or smart, but because I tell him that he has confidence, that he could be something, that he could be amazing. Because to see a black boy grow is just like a plant. My son has to be watered. He has to receive nutrients, light, and all of those things. So for the black boy in your life, make sure that they're growing. Make sure that they're getting everything that they need, because we live in a world that doesn't want to see them grow. We live in a world that just wants to rip them up by the roots. Listen, man, I love y'all. Go hug your son. Peace. Appreciate y'all as always. Till next time.